welcome everyone. I am beyond excited today to welcome Schrepp to SPC. I think this is your second time.
Second visit, yeah.
Second visit, yeah. Bigger digs. And you know, Schrepp is a dear friend, also my former boss, and a mentor to me, I think, as I go through my journey of life trying to do interesting things. He's someone I constantly look back to as someone who has kind of like, I think, shown me the way in many ways. Schrepp, I will embarrass you a little bit maybe, but on Monday we had our founder fellowship kickoff, and Ruchi was doing an AMA with all our founders. And one of the questions was, who are three people who have kind of like profoundly affected your life over the last 3 years, like 10 years, and that you have learned from? And she said, you were one of them. And she's a, and listen, Ruchi's a tough cookie. I didn't make that list.
It's a tough grade.
I didn't make that list. But Schrepp, you have had an incredible, I think, incredible career in Silicon Valley. I think you graduated from Stanford in 97. Am I getting that right?
97, yeah.
97, that's right. And then you had a bunch of pre-Facebook kind of like, I would say adventures that, I think it's always fun to learn about. And then you were at Facebook, I think you started there in 2007.
2008, yeah.
2008. And then you were there until just a couple of years ago, and you're still involved there. But before we kind of get into a lot of the work that Schrepp is doing now in terms of gigascale and the climate tech work, maybe we can spend the first 10 minutes just reminiscing a little bit about Facebook. So Schrepp, maybe to kind of start off, what are you most proud of from your time at Facebook?
Well, first of all, thank you for those thoughts. And you describe it as much more of a one-way relationship than it is. I think the real joy of being in tech and being in this industry is I get to learn from everyone I work with. And that definitely includes you and Ruchi. So it's not obvious to me that there has been more from me to you than the other way around. And same to Ruchi. In terms of like pride at Facebook, I think it boils down to, there's a lot of things, but I think the two, if I had to pick some favorites, would be some specific aspects of the engineering culture, and we can talk about that. And then I'd say the consistent ability to deliver developer platforms that the whole world uses. If you think about in the early days of web development, it was React, became kind of the de facto sort of React Native on mobile. When AI sort of came onto the scene, if you do any major AI research or development, you're probably doing it in PyTorch, maybe doing it in JAX. Those are all products from Facebook across 3 different technology stacks. And there are lots of others. There's thousands of other open source projects, but it's sort of less the one thing we did and more that, and I think the two are related. We built a culture that was able to build a set of tools that were so well loved that kind of got adopted by the whole world.
It's interesting because I think that, unlike a bunch of, I would say maybe Google maybe in particular, which is always, I would say, at the forefront with its engineering DNA, Facebook always, I think, leads with like the product and kind of the impact it has on users. But to your point, well, I think Facebook's first open source project was Thrift. And there were 3 authors, like this guy was one of them. But we don't talk about it as much, right? Like a lot of our platforms, a lot of the open source packages and all of those things are kind of kept in the background. So I guess the question is, how do you make that something that Facebook engineering aspires to, and it's something that's really celebrated within the companies? Like, what did you do to make engineering excellence, like kind of like the depth of excellence, be something that everyone in the company appreciated?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's like hard to not talk about it without talking about engineering culture. And it actually informs the way I approach my work today, which is, honestly, it starts from having a little bit of humility sort of at the top of not knowing the answers to all the questions. And so, whether I was VP of engineering or CTO, being like, hey, which like JavaScript framework should we use? Now, I'm pretty smart, I wrote code, I tried them all, like I had opinions, but like my opinion is a lot less important than sort of the wisdom of the crowds, which is, hey, when developers are given a choice, what do they choose? Because they want the one that is like easier to use and more fun. And so we sort of stoked a development culture that was, I wouldn't call it entirely bottom up. It's the right combination of top down, bottom up. And I think that the importance of the top down is problem identification and prioritization. It's like, look, what problems do we need to work on? Which are the highest priority? And how would you sort amongst them? And then within that, you get a lot of energy bottom up on how to solve those problems. So if it was like, hey, productivity in web development is a huge problem, like then building a better framework to do that's really important. If same thing in AI development is there. If building RPC services is really important, we need a thrift. Yeah. So making the database work for the social media world and not for traditional offline applications. So we had to do a lot of work there. And so you like create the conditions to allow people to build tools that they want to use. And this is part of why I love open source. Like open source is the introduction of market forces within a company, right? Because if like we open source something and nobody else likes it, right? But we think it's awesome, like I think the world's right and we're wrong. And so it creates this awesome market pressure, which is like it has to be great. And if some other open source project is overtaking our thing, we should just switch to that. And so I like had a constant sort of bottoms up plus market forces, a little bit of humility at the top, but it is not, I think some people take the bottom up thing too far and be like, it's like sort of absentee management, or it's like, no, I had opinions on like what the priorities were, and I would joke, and you probably experienced some of this, is like, you should be able to predict with very high precision your predictor, and like, if you ask me, hey, Schrepp, what's up? You know what's coming out of my mouth, like, because I'm going to say the same damn thing over and over again. Right now it's reliability. Next year it's performance. The year after that, switch to mobile. The year after that, it's AI. Like whatever it is like I'm going to be on message on the priorities, so you know what the goal is, and then I'm like, now I need you to go work on that. And give me some good stuff. And so that combination, I think, is a really hard thing to get right, but when you get it right with the right people, it's kind of magic.
There's an interesting distinction there that I like. There's always this balance in leadership where you want to lead confidently, but you don't want to be dictating everything. You want to take in feedback, but kind of navigating that tension can be tricky sometimes. And I liked what you said there. You're kind of choosing priorities. You're choosing the problems to look at and the problems to push away for another day. You're not necessarily dictating the solutions to all of those problems. I like it.
Yeah, this is actually there was an incredible blog post, I think, last week by Moxie Marlinspike. I don't know if that did the rounds, but he was kind of talking about how some of the best engineering breakthroughs come when people see past the abstraction layers and essentially in some ways like transmute their ideas. Often it's like, for graphics is the classic example. There are lots of software hacks on top of like hardware things, and then you kind of make the hardware do things that you don't think were possible by kind of using like hacks, right? Like kind of, this is famously the case. And he made a really interesting analogy to engineering organizations, which he said that the de facto way of scaling organizations is divide and conquer, right? You basically silo stuff off, and you kind of partition the problem, and then everybody goes and does their thing, and hopefully if everybody does their thing well, and you combine, then you get a well-functioning product and system. But his subtle point was that often the most interesting breakthroughs that organizations make, and this is why startups are easier to do this, is when you are able to have teams that transcend boundaries, right?
You've touched on, and this is something that you can corroborate, is like, I think microservices were a big hot thing for a while, and a lot of people, and we were explicitly at Facebook for a very long time a monolith. Like you could check out the whole code base, you could refactor the whole thing if you wanted, and check the whole damn thing back in and start it up and run it. And there was a whole lot of people who'd show up and be like, oh my God, this is a bad idea. You got to break this down into microservices. And I think what you do there is you build these friction points between each of these modules. And now, like, if I want to change across these 2,000 microservices, like, man, I can't even conceptualize it. And we levered that. In a lot of cases, you would have people like refactor entire parts of the code base very quickly. And so I think that notion of kind of being able to take apart the entire machine and do it, I think you can put this into the climate tech world very clearly, or in the hardware world very clearly, where companies rely too much on third-party suppliers. When you have a product where you only build a small part of it, and I have 2,000 suppliers, I basically built a microservice. Because now if I'm like, hey, I need a bolt that's a little bit bigger, or can you make it out of magnesium, I got to talk to them, they got to do it, they got to manufacture. If I build the entire thing in-house, like I can go talk to him like, hey, can you spin another version of this? Like, got it, tomorrow. And then boom, we've got a new version done. So we see a lot more success in the hardware world of, what honestly SpaceX, I'll give credit for, pioneered. They didn't have a supply chain, so they'd build the whole damn thing. But companies where they're just like, we're just going to build most things today, and with 3D printing and rapid prototyping, certainly at small scale, you can kind of build it yourself while you're rapidly iterating what the product is. Once you lock it in, you need to use a different supply chain. But when you do that, your cycle time is like, it's not like 10% faster. It's like 2 orders of magnitude faster. And that's the difference between like success and failure, basically.
Yeah.
And so I think there's analogies there, and this is like speed of iteration. And I think, when people sometimes sarcastically they don't actually understand all the work Meta did in data centers and AR, VR, and consumer headsets and smart glasses and all the rest of it, and they're like, this web stuff, you guys don't know rapid iteration. And it's exactly wrong. Like, the best hardware companies are actually the fastest at iterating. And they're asking the question at every moment in time, what's the quickest, dumbest, cheapest way I can build something? One of our companies is building this like crazy high pressure, high temperature turbine, and like their first prototype was a Home Depot build. They're like, let me get a blower from Home Depot and a bunch of tin foil and some other stuff and like light some crap on fire in my backyard and like learn some lessons. Like, that is the team that's gonna make a lot of rapid progress.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think across my career, one thing I've tried to get teams to think about is measuring everything they're doing in cycles. And so that immediately starts you thinking, okay, well, like, if I need 30 to 50 cycles to get something that's like good in V1 and people will start to use, shit, like, if my cycle time is a month, that's a world of difference from a cycle time of 3 days.
Yeah, I was just reflecting. I mean, I think that some of these things are only obvious in retrospect. But yeah, I mean, for the longest time at Facebook, you would, the kind of initiation hazing ceremony for engineers would be check out the whole code base, basically pick a bug at random, could be anywhere in the stack, and you should be able to solve that bug. Like, this is not that hard. Like, go up and down the stack, because, we wanted to have a culture of total ownership. Certainly in boot camp, like, you weren't kind of given bugs specifically for the areas that you were solving. But that led to a huge amount of both, I would say, agency, but then also speed, like in ways that I don't think I understood even at that point.
Yeah, and I think speed, it goes all the way down, because you remember this, you were there, when I joined, we had the weekly push, right? We would update the website once a week, major updates, on Tuesdays. And there was this like concerted push to basically, we set this crazy goal. It's like, let's go to continuous. Like, literally, diff gets checked in, minimum amount of time between that diff is live for, at the time, hundreds of millions of people, now billions of people. And man, I can't tell you how many people were like, this is a terrible idea, do not do this, right? And we did it anyway. And when it caused problems, I think the key thing is when you set these goals is like, speed is the most important thing, time to make a change is the most important thing. So when we do something and something goes wrong, the question isn't like, oh no, should we do something different? It's like, how do we fix that problem, right? How do we resolve it more quickly? How do we build, we build all sorts of crazy stuff with, Canary, we do a small push to a small number of machines so we don't break the whole site all at once, do a Canary and other things like that. So we built all this infrastructure tooling that was basically designed around how do you make continuous deployment safe? And then we moved to it. Now, again, these things, and after that, it's like, well, that's obviously the thing you should do. But like, wasn't obvious in 2008.
Yeah, now institutionalized and stuff like the DORA metrics, where like, okay, how fast are you deploying, and how easy is it to roll back, et cetera. Yeah.
Yep.
So this stuff is, now we understand at least a good way of doing software engineering with speed and scale. I'm actually curious, in your travels so far in the climate part of the world, what are some things that, you actually brought up a really good point, which is like actually owning the vertical integration of all your component suppliers that leads to fast. What are some other things you have seen that kind of fit like this is breaking with orthodoxy to kind of like enable more innovation and more speed? That's actually really interesting.
It's a super exciting, it was like, I wasn't totally sure this was gonna be true, so I didn't come in like expecting the right answer, and the more I dug in, the more optimistic I got. Because there's like a set of compounding factors. You always look, and everything we did at Meta is like, all right, why should we do AI now? It's like, well, we have tailwinds. You have compute tailwinds, compute's gonna get better, you have data tailwinds. So like, no matter what we do, it's like, it gets easier every year. And you always wanna look for problems like, is it gonna be easier next year even if I don't do anything, or harder next year if I don't do anything? And whenever it's the first, you've got a really interesting business. In the climate world, you have a bunch of tailwinds in your favor. So you have tailwinds in the like, renewable energy, solar, batteries, wind are getting dramatically cheaper every year, even if you do nothing, right? So cost of energy will go down over time. Cost of inputs can go down. If I'm building anything with a battery, right? Lithium-ion batteries have gotten 85% cheaper in the last 10 years, 97% cheaper since they were introduced in the market in 91. They've got about 50% cheaper in China in the last year alone. So if I just like, it's like, I want to build this thing, and it's going to be battery-powered, but it's like twice as expensive as the gas-powered thing. It's like, wait 2 years. Like, without doing anything, you're cost competitive. So cost advantaged, actually. So you got a bunch of tailwinds in your favor. But on the speed dimension particularly, because that's what you asked, we have this buildup of tools, and it's a whole set of things. 3D printing was this thing that everyone thought everyone would have a 3D printer in their home, and it's kind of didn't happen on the consumer side. On the industrial side, it's a total game changer. Because you can rapidly prototype materials and rapidly prototype things back to your cycle time. Instead of waiting 6 weeks for my part to come back in or to air freight it from somewhere, I have it in my lab today. And we built a 3D printing lab at Meta to do these sorts of things. You have computational modeling. So we have one company that's building an offshore wave power system. And it's basic, it's an amazing piece of technology. It's just like a little buoy that floats and bobs up and down in the water, generates continuous clean energy. Might be the cheapest form of energy production we'll have on the planet. And they can use computational fluid dynamics to simulate their system. So their system is a 200-meter tall tube that's 10 meters wide. So it's kind of takes a while to build it. So you kind of want to make sure it works before you build the 200-meter tall one. So a lot of what they do is they say, like, we ran all these complicated simulations, and the final thing when we dropped it in the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Washington, was at plus or minus 3% to our simulations, right? And so you're like, cool. So then when we do a redesign and do the Rev 2, we can do it all in software. And be like, all right, we made these changes to make these optimizations, and it's a 20% efficiency improvement, plus or minus 3% error. We're good to go. Like, cycle time is really, really fast. So you have sort of computational modeling, and that's everything from fluid dynamics to materials design. You have 3D printing. And then there's a cultural component. And I think this one is actually underestimated. And again, I'm not to be a fanboy on this, but to credit like ex-SpaceX, ex-Tesla people who just like approach these problems from the first principles. There's a whole set of people who are trained to like, when I solve a problem, I like literally get the catalog out and see which parts I can buy to solve that problem. It's like, all right, I need a transformer. How much does that cost? Like, let me do that. And then you've got this new generation of people that are like, wait, what the hell is this thing made of? Why is this $10,000? Let me put it on the scale over here. Like 100 pounds? So wait, it costs how much per pound? It's made out of steel? Steel's $1,000 a pound. That's not right. Like, let me start tearing this thing apart and do it. We have another company that's building, they're basically trying to disrupt chemicals, a big dirty industry that nobody cares about. They make this chemical called ethylene. Probably no one's ever heard of ethylene. It's the most made organic molecule on Earth. If you've ever had a yogurt cup, you've got made ethylene in it. The way we make it is this dirty, nasty process that I won't go into details. These folks have figured out an electrochemical way. So you just take electricity in and you get sort of ethylene out. But one of the things that's been holding back is you have this like membrane in the middle that is this big, and again, they like try to get it from suppliers. Like, why is this thing so expensive? They tore it apart. And so what they did is they start making their own. And it's like 100x, 1,000x cheaper, and it's faster because they've got this massive cycle time. It's actually not that hard to build. So you've got this new generation of people that are just like willing to like first principles something out. And like you start, and anything in the physical world is how much does it weigh and what is it made of? And then with that and a little bit of like a notebook, I can tell you about how much it should cost. And if it's like 10x that, somebody's ripping you off. And so that's super fun. And there is a little industry of like rapid prototyping and developing and things, so you just see this sort of attitude of like, yeah, we can do this. And so that's super exciting on top of all the compute and other wins out there, plus component parts becoming, again, batteries, solar, wind, et cetera, becoming dramatically cheaper. So there's like a lot of, and we can go in specific markets, there's even better tailwinds. So there's a lot of stuff happening that makes it really exciting.
Shrep, you're getting me fired up. This is like, this reminds me a lot of the Facebook ethos, which is that it's like whatever the problem is, just like work the problem, go into the source, just like go deeper. There's nothing that a good engineer can't solve. Really, that was kind of the way I used to think about my job.
The best question in the world is why.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Hey, we can't do this. Why?
Why?
And like until you get to because it violates the second law of thermodynamics, I don't like the answer.
It seems like that's driven, hearing you talk about some of the thesis for Gigascale and how you've come to climate and approaching these problems. You've described it as very engineering-oriented, quant-heavy kind of just problem-solving. We're bringing a bunch of tools. We're agnostic to what we're doing. Let's just go look at these problems and say, okay, how can we address these? I'm curious to hear more. Like, where has that served you well with climate, and where has it not served you so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I think you heard a lot of like how I approach it and serve it well. Because like it's not all glory. I've definitely made mistakes. I'll tell you what hasn't served me well is like ultimately you're building products that are in the market. This is going to sound really obvious 101. People need to buy those things. They need to care about buying them, et cetera, et cetera. And so like you can get a little overly fixated on the technology. And there have been places where I'm like, well, this is clearly the right solution to this problem. This thing is 5x cheaper, 10x cheaper, but I didn't at all understand the market dynamics. Like, well, who are the people paying for this and what do they care about? And like it turns out, unfortunately, there are a lot of non-rational actors. There are a lot of people that when you show up with a cheaper product won't buy it for a whole variety of reasons. And so you got to get a lot smarter on the business side of things. So this is why, like, did he ask me if I'm, on the climate thing, a capitalist? Like, hell yeah, I'm a capitalist. Like, we're going to use technology to drive down prices, make better products, but it's got to be a business. You got to customers that want to buy this thing. And if you don't, like, nothing else matters because you need the funding to go after and go do it. So, like, I think in the early days of my investing, I got, like, super excited about nerding out on all these crazy cool technologies. And I certainly picked a couple of technologies that I still think are super cool, but, like, it turns out the market they were going after didn't have customers with enough willingness to buy that, like, from a business, it was a cool technology, bad business. Not making that mistake again.
Schroepfer, if I may jump in with one thing, I was going to ask you about this earlier, but then we started talking about the technology and I got excited. But maybe walk us through a little bit of your -1 journey as you were kind of figuring out what to do next after Meta/Facebook. You were kind of in the enviable position of probably tackling, in some ways, with your background and your connectivity, anything you wanted, right? Like you could have done a bunch of different things. How did you navigate kind of that period of like having infinite possibility and then kind of honing in on this thing? Like, what was that process like? What was your emotional? It's often kind of emotionally hard also.
Yeah. No, let's this is good. And by the way, we can jump back to Facebook and to Meta, talk about that as much as you want. I can't help but steer you into the current. So please, it's not like please, and the audience get questions there. I want to make sure we're talking about stuff that this group is excited to talk about. But I think that the last thing you said, I'm just going to like start with, which is for anyone who's been in a situation where you have a lot of choice, it's hard. And this is something for those who don't have choice, it's hard to have empathy for, right? So I'm gonna have empathy. If you're a new entrepreneur, like I could do anything, and this has been studied. I'm sure you guys have seen these fun studies where they sample jams, and if I give you like 3 choices of jam, you pick one you're really excited about. If I give you 17 choices of jam and you pick the blueberry lemon one, you're gonna go home and be like, God, should I have gotten the raspberry mulberry one? I don't know if I made the right choice, right? Like it's just harder when you have more choices. It's just a focus. So I think the first thing is acknowledge that. And then the second thing is to realize, well, if that's the case, and that's like an innate human thing, you've got to figure out ways to like narrow your aperture a little bit. And you got to pick some things that are reasonable to do it. And for everyone, it's a different thing. I think if you're doing anything entrepreneurial or anything where you're driving it, you realize that like your primary job is to inject energy into it. Like if I don't show up for work, things don't happen. In a big company, if I don't show up for work, it's kind of okay, right? And so if you have to inject energy, you have to have that energy come from somewhere, and it's got to be you, which means you got to be really damn excited about what you're working on, right? Just because you think it's cool, because you believe it's a mission, because you love the people. Like, I don't care what it is, but like you got to start with what am I fundamentally excited about? My journey on this was pretty simple, and it's very recent. It was 2020. It was the COVID crisis. I was here in the Bay Area. Everything's locked down. It's kind of like hanging out in my house with the kids. I, spent my whole, it's all fun to talk about, but man, we worked really hard the whole freaking time. And I had kids the whole time, kids while we were there. So it was like, people were like, what are your hobbies, Schroepfer? I was like, it's like trying to stay alive. I'm like trying to do my job, see my kids, like sleep a little bit. Like I don't have time for hobbies. So it was like survival mode for much of my career. I started companies in the past, being an entrepreneur. I would joke when I started my company in 2000, it was like we took Sunday afternoons off. Like that was our day off. So so I was just used to working all the time. COVID came around and it was this really weird confluence of like we're still working really hard, but like you minused all of the logistical stuff. I wasn't driving my kids anywhere. There's no activities. I wasn't driving into the office. Like things on Zoom were actually more efficient. So I had this extra time. I was kind of watching the world melt down, and it reinforced a view I had, which is like humans are actually pretty good in an acute crisis. When like extreme storm happens, something like we rally. We're like awesome species on that. When it's a slow burn, going to happen over the next 10 or 20 years, and we got to like start stocking up to toilet paper to be prepared, like we suck. And so I was just like, well, okay, what are the like real big slow burn problems? And like climate is the mother of all of those slow burn problems. It's kind of hard to understand. Weather is variable, whatever's happening with the climate. If you actually like start to study it, it gets really scary really fast. You know, you're in a situation where in 20, 30 years, parts of the earth will be uninhabitable. Sea level rise could be like 3 feet, maybe 6 feet by the end of the century. Like this is just like horrific, billion climate migrants, like really scary, scary stuff. And so you're like, huh, okay. The next obvious question is there anything we can do about it, or are we just totally screwed? And so that was the first part of the journey. It's like, well, I got to do the learner's mind on, I hired a consulting firm to be like, all right, just like, I want to start doing philanthropy on this. I still have my full-time job. I figured I would just keep doing my thing at Meta. Like, get me smart. I just did the basic, like, climate 101, like, what are sources of emissions? And, like, what can we do about them? And how could you get rid of them? And I could ask all the, like, I don't understand how that works. Explain it to me. Sort of dumb questions over, like, a year, basically. And my theory was just, like, I'm going to start directing our philanthropic resources towards these problems. We ended up spinning up a bunch of stuff there that is continuing on to this day, and just did a bunch of new stuff that I'm really excited about. That is pretty out there stuff, but I think could be hugely impactful. But along the way, I started meeting entrepreneurs, and I just learned more and more. And as I said, it's like, look, this is like a $10 trillion problem-ish. 50 trillion, 10 trillion, tens of trillions of dollars. And you start looking at that and go like, what problems has philanthropy solved that are on the order of 10, like none. Governments can't do it. Philanthropy and government can like get the ball rolling, but at the end of the day, what you're doing is reforming half a dozen, $2 trillion industries. And the only way that works is self-interest. Those industries are like, I'm doing this thing because I like it more, it's better, cheaper, faster, I make more money. And so it's like, okay, our job is to like move stuff from the like green premium, which is the word I hate, to what we invest in, which is like the green discount. It's like, I'm gonna win because my thing's cheaper. And you start looking at it, the very next question is like, okay, is that like a pipe dream? Is that like a wish and a hope and a dream? Or are there realities? And I just kept bumping into more and more people that are like, basically you have a cost curve that looks like this, which is like we're going on this crazy cost curve down, and then there's this line, which is like the current fossil fuel one, and you're like here, and you're like, hey, as soon as we cross this line, we're cheaper. And you're just like, okay. Like, I've seen a lot of things that look like that, let's go. And so, that is where I decided to sort of focus my energy and time. But I would start with like, again, popping all the way back up to the stack as entrepreneurs, like, it's hard. Pick something you're really excited about. I don't care. It doesn't have to be climate. Like, it's my thing. You can do something else. Biology, social issues. There's a lot of problems to solve in the world. Doesn't matter. Pick it, but pick it because you like it and you're excited about it. I think that's the most important thing.
It's a great origin story. I've definitely felt that same kind of coming to mission-driven work over the past 10 years in my work. And it's a great segue into one of the big questions I was excited to talk to you about, which is business model in climate tech. So yeah, the idea of, okay, let's switch this green premium to a green discount. We've seen it obviously with solar PV, batteries, a number of other things. I know you're a fan of Wright's Law. I'm excited to talk about that too. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty damn good. In some ways, philanthropy is complicated, but in some ways, approaching mission stuff with philanthropy is easier. Like, if you are trying to do it through the markets, through entrepreneurship, famously, climate has been an externality to the markets for a long time. Like, no one had to pay for it. It was this cost we were slowly all going to pay for over the next century, but it wasn't priced in. It's getting priced in, regulatory here and there, maybe not enough. It's getting priced in with voluntary, but like for a while, it has seemed to me like that the dominant business model in climate is offsets or credits, which is tough because they've been troubled recently. Are you saying that, well, that doesn't work so well, let's just push for a green discount? Or do you see that both of them have a place? Like, how do you see the business side working?
Yeah, I think that there are two giant forces, two giant tailwinds. There is the sort of like increasing pressure from, and by the way, I want to be clear that I think philanthropy and government have a huge role to play. If you look at any interesting industry transition, they happened on the back of philanthropy and government. And so I think that they have a massive role to play here, as does industry. But I think there's two big forces happening in the market. There is the sort of pricing in of that. And I think people get fixated on carbon markets, but there are a whole bunch of regulations in Europe, in the US, in California, from shipping to food to others that start to put pressure on people to understand their emissions, reduce them in different ways. And that doesn't just mean carbon, that often means like being more efficient in their supply chain, using better, less electricity. And this is like in Meta, when we built our first data center, the big innovation where we spent all our time and energy on it was like, literally, how do we make it use less power? Because that's the biggest source of OpEx. And the first rule is always efficiency. It's like, we didn't put air conditioners in it, we used free air cooling. It's a massive savings over a very long time period. So you've got regulatory pressure that is happening. This isn't like voluntary people care about. These are like laws on the books or coming on the books. In New York City, if you have a building over 35 stories, you have to pay taxes on your imputed carbon output. So there's like a law on the books that's being enforced. So, and there are tons of laws like that all across the world. That means when you go to a building owner and be like, hey, I can like figure out what you're actually emitting and make it less and save you. Like you're about to get a $100,000 tax bill. Would you like it to be less? Like they'll take your call. So there's that. And then again, there's the technological pressures coming in that's saying like, well, forget all of that. Just like I'm showing up with something, and electrochemistry is one example, is a way to use electricity to make things rather than thermochemistry, heat. It has gone down this like 80% cost reduction, in the last decade. And so you're seeing is like, I'm like really close to this line that once I cross it, I'm just cheaper. And then we haven't even talked about demand for energy. So I think, carbon markets is not the biggest market. Energy is the market. It's a $2 trillion market. You can't like stumble over a Twitter post now without seeing crazy concerns about AI demand. You're talking about gigawatt, 5 gigawatt data centers. That's one part of the story. EVs have taken off. They're now, a double-digit portion of the entire market, and that's a runaway train. And so we're starting to electrify everything. It's going to create a lot of additional demand for electricity. The thing most people don't know is even in the US, we don't use most of our energy for electricity right now. Most of our energy, so like including stuff we dig out of the ground and burn, is used in industrial heat, in transportation, in heating, in homes and others, and then a portion of it is used to produce electricity. It's used for other things. So if you want to get rid of all of that, you're going to need a whole hell of a lot more electricity. So you put all these things together, we're probably going to 4x, 5x, 10x our electricity production in the next 20 years. We've been going on like a 1% growth, or flat for the last decade, And then you're like, we can't do that. China did it by 7x in the last 2 decades. That's how much more power they're generating. And it's predominantly clean power. So, that produces amazing market opportunities. So there's one company I talked about, they're a biomass, next generation biomass turbine, bunch of ex-SpaceX engineers, including some folks from GE who worked on big gas turbines. And they're like, hey, we have technology now that if we do a very high pressure burn, you can put wood waste, think forestry thinning from California, oxygen in, you get clean power out, firm power, water and pure CO2 that you can then sequester or do something else with. And so they signed a deal with Microsoft that's like, it's a 5 megawatt power deal and 25,000 tons of sequestration. So it's 5 megawatts of clean, 24/7 firm power, and carbon is like insane. And that's gonna be plant 1. Plant 2 will be 5 times as big, and very profitable. So they're gonna do great. And Dioxycle, which is the company that makes ethylene, is like, their first plant is gonna do great. So because you're riding these cost curves down. So I do think that this like market pressure plus technological innovation plus like demand for electricity is causing this like intersection that like the more I dug into it, I was just like, I mean, even if you don't care about it, I think it's a really good sector to be investing in. Like, wouldn't you want to be investing in a $12 trillion re-engineering of the market? Like, that sounds like a place where there's opportunities to make money. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's encouraging to hear, especially since when you're kind of myopically looking at the offsets and credits, you say, man, that's kind of a mess in a bunch of ways. It's great to hear we don't need to lean on that maybe quite as much.
Can I give you one other example? Because I hate big platitudes and I like specifics. So, and I swear this is not a pitch session. Obviously I like them because I like them, but let me just go totally orthogonal, like 2 other examples of like business models that work. One is a product many of you some of you may have, which is called Mill, which is a home composting device. It's a little trash can, looks like step on it, top opens, you put it in your kitchen, costs about $1,000. It's the founder of Nest. The idea is you put food waste into there. Here in California, we've got green bins. Most of the United States doesn't have green bins. Even if you have one, most people don't use them. Why is like I dump my eggs and my raw chicken into my somewhere in my kitchen and it frickin' smells. And so now I got to take out this like bag of like soupy stuff. And Mill's basic pitch is like, yeah, don't do any of that. You dump all this stuff into the mill. It dries it out, grinds it up, so it doesn't smell. It also gets 80% smaller. So you do this for like a month. And then after a month of a normal family's use, you have like a shoebox size of what looks like non-smelly like coffee grounds, which you can put in your green bin, you can put in your backyard, or you stick a USPS label on it, send it back to them. They turn it into chicken feed. They've got approval from that, turn it into food feed. And you're like, so people freaking love this thing. I've worked on a lot of consumer hardware products, and I can't tell you what the NPS is, if people know what NPS is, but it's the highest NPS of anything I've seen. People like, if you get one, you're gonna be that annoying friend at every party, like, do you have a meal? Let me tell you about my meal, come see it. Like, and so they can't like make enough of these things, right? And you're like, whoa, that sounds great. They've diverted 2 million pounds of food waste from landfills, which produce methane, which is the most potent greenhouse gas, or one of the most potent. So it's like massive climate impact on the back of people buying stuff because they're like, I'm tired of like carrying messy, smelly trash out. I don't have to do that anymore. So like totally orthogonal business model. You know, I can give you 6 others if you're interested. I'll probably stop there so we can get to other questions.
Let me ask a spicy question here. So my spicy question here is, Shrep, is one of the big takeaways from, viewing climate tech or investing as being this massive kind of industry that, you can create a bunch of value and also kind of, in some ways capture value from, is that conservancy as a global movement just doesn't make sense. Humans don't want to like globally cooperate to do less of something. You have to find ways of like I want to use 10x more energy. How much more awesome would my life be if I could have access to low cost 10x more energy? What are the things I could do? My life would be a lot more awesome. And in fact, one of the sad things is that in the United States, our per capita energy consumption has mostly stayed flat for like, or maybe gone up by.
Yeah, that's a deceiving number because it does not count the embedded energy and all the stuff we buy overseas.
Yeah, that's true. So what is the actual number? I'm curious.
I don't actually know. I haven't done the calculation, but I think that it's a large portion of the decline or flatness of U.S. energy is like, it's like you have not counted all the energy and all the stuff I bought overseas and shipped here. And so it's just primary energy consumption. But your bigger point is the right point, which is just like, if you do a historical plot of energy use and GDP, it is, I mean, correlation isn't causation, but like, holy crap, it is the most correlated graph you can possibly make. Right. And it's just like, the way to get people out of poverty is to get them energy. Like, can you read books at night is like a basic thing. Can I cook things? Can I stay warm and cool when the weather is out there, or do I suffer and can't do anything? Like, these are really basic human needs, and that's like the bottom of the Maslow triangle here. When you get up to like, can I have a, an AI agent like running a process for me continuously all the time? Like, yeah, we should get that to 10 billion people, along with like food, water, light, all of the things. And like, we can do it. Like, it's possible. We've done it in the US, we've done it in China, we can kind of do it throughout the world. That's the bogey we should be going after. And then you go like, okay, cool, how can we make 10x more energy? And it's like, all right, we can roll out wind, we can roll out solar, we can roll out batteries. We've got a bunch of credible shots and some crazy stuff like fusion. And if one of those hits, like, and it's based on really good science, then we get to a point where it's like, unlimited clean energy for everything. So, that is a future we can get to. And that's part of why I get fired up is like, we should at a minimum take a really hard swing at it.
Yeah. It's a great kind of elucidation of one thing that has frustrated me about a lot of conversation about climate is this idea of like degrowth will fix it. We have too many people. Let's stop growing. Let's not kind of develop like have so many more people use so much more energy. Everything else, and it's frustrating. Like no, I mean. Even bringing down the population to 90% won't fix it. Like telling billions of people in India and China and elsewhere, no, you can't get like raised out of poverty.
You can't get to what we have. This is the problem. We got a whole lot of the world that looks at how we live and like, I'd like to eat meat. I'd like to have air conditioning. I'd like to have a refrigerator. And I think it is like immoral to say no.
It is completely immoral. Yeah.
Not only that, but we need to go spend tens of trillions of dollars. To your point, we need growth and development and all that. I appreciate this. I'm going to change subject a bit. I know we're doing a talk here. You all are out there, but I'm like jealously. I'm going to ask for some career advice. I've spent my last 3 years in climate. I expect to spend my next N years in climate, but I've struggled a little figuring out where to go next. And the people who have come to the Climate Forum have definitely heard me kind of whine and moan about this. One thing I noticed in your portfolio, Gigascale, it's a lot of hard tech and not necessarily software. So you mentioned DoxyCycle, Mill. I love Cocoon, doing stuff with materials, cement and steel. One thing a lot of people don't know, cement and steel each are something like 8 to 10% of global emissions, CO2e, on a CO2e basis. Really great swings, mostly not software, which is fine. I'm an engineer and engineering leader. I've learned a bit about climate. I'm not going back to school for, to undergrad to become a climate scientist, and I don't expect I need to. But when I've looked at what to do in climate, I've struggled. I've looked at, okay, do I believe has real impact? What do I believe? Where is software kind of more central and not peripheral? And where is someone like me additional? And I've ended up in MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, just like, let's go see what's out there, what's emitting, and carbon accounting, which is, like, a dirty secret is most people have no idea what they're emitting, even your big companies, whether it's in their supply chain or direct. First thing we got to do is count it up. MRV, again, a lot of the business has been offset-based, and that's been troubled for a year or two, at least voluntary. Carbon accounting, like, hugely important. There's great startups out there doing it. At the end of the day, it's compliance software. You got to be a special person to wake up and get out of bed every morning and say, I am psyched to go to work to build a reporting tool, you know? And maybe this is me just, not being big-hearted enough, but like, how am I thinking wrong about this?
This is a great question, and I have sort of good news and bad news. I think the bad news, I'll start there, is like, I think too many people start with like the tool and don't start with the problem. So you're like, I got a hammer, my hammer is software, what can I go hit? And I think the answer was pure software. There are some nails to hit, but they're limited. Because fundamentally, we're talking about atoms. We're talking about electrons, we're talking about moving stuff, we're talking about growing food. Software can be a major component of it, so I think you gotta open your aperture a little bit. I'll give you one, again, because I like specifics. I'll give you a specific example of someone who went on this journey, like you, which is Selena Tabakawala is a multi-time founder. She's really a product person. She founded Evite back in the day, if you remember that. She worked in a healthcare startup. She was at SurveyMonkey for a while. Incredible, what I'd say, like classic Silicon Valley consumer product person. She's like, at her heart, it's like, I know how to talk to people and build products they love, right? You're like, what the hell do I do? Like, well, I'm not gonna work on cement or steel, right? So, so she kind of went through a journey, and we worked with her on this, and she basically figured out, okay, like home energy efficiency is a huge thing. There's a lot of ways that you can help a consumer save money on their home that like pays back within a year. So it's like financially makes sense for them to do this. They just don't know what it is. And so she went after a market that said like, oh, I'm sure you've heard radio ads for like PG&E will come do a home energy audit. And like someone shows up in a hard hat and a clipboard and in a truck, schedules like 6 months out for an 8-hour window to show up to your house to tell you like you should insulate your attic, basically. So, and she was like, there's got to be a better way. And so they built basically a home kit that you can just get mailed to you that has a thermal camera and a bunch of other things in it. So there is a little bit of hardware in it, but it is software too, because it's ultimately an app experience that a consumer has to use to like run around my house and like image it. And then it tells me, it's like, okay, yeah, you're like weather strip your front door, like insulate your thing, like replace your refrigerator, like your water heater's good. And then by the way, here's some contractors who will do that for you. So, but it's fundamentally a consumer product problem. It's like, how do I make the average consumer who's busy, doesn't care about this stuff, like understand very quickly where the big levers are. So I would encourage you to open up your aperture a little bit and start problem statement first, which is like, home energy seems like a thing. I'll give you one other specific example, which is the only pure software company we backed to date. That's a company called Arch. And we found that company after asking a very simple question, which is like, heat pumps are this like magic technology. Everyone know what a heat pump is? It's like a way to either heat or cool a space. And when you first describe, you're like, that doesn't make sense. It like breaks one of the laws of thermodynamics, which is basically you can move more heating or cooling, often 4 to 6x, depending on conditions, than energy you put in. So in other words, I put a watt of energy in, I can get 3 watts of cooling or heating, or up to 6 watts of cooling or heating. You're like, that doesn't work. And you're like, oh, but it's literally in the name. It's not turning electricity into heat or cooling. It's literally moving energy from one place to another. So it's transporting. So the transport cost of pumping the heat from outside to inside is less than the amount of heat I'm moving, which kind of makes sense. Just like a truck full of fuel basically transports more fuel than it uses to burn to get there. So you're like, okay, that's super cool. They're really good, they're really efficient. Why the hell isn't people, like everyone in the world, running around and installing them? And so we met a ton of companies. We talked to HVAC contractors. We talked to consumers. Like it's this big, nasty, gnarly, market. Every business model in the business, people are building new heat pumps. They're going vertical. We found this one entrepreneur who basically like started problem first. He like talked to me. He's like, yeah, I just like did a bunch of ride along. I would like call HVAC contractors and be like, can I come with you to an installation? And they were like, it's like the first like 3 said no. Like what? Are you some weirdo or something? And then the fourth one's like, yeah, come along. It's like I literally like rode along in the truck like for days to just go and be like, what is this person's business like? And what are they doing? And just like did this again and again and again and started to figure out, it's a bunch of things they're doing that like if we built some software for, literally they could build and bid 4 systems rather than 3 a day. And that would make their business and make us a bunch of money too. And so like, let's just start there. And so they've been building an awesome business basically as a B2B software solution for HVAC contractors, but it started off the back of a deep understanding of the problem. It wasn't like, I want to do something in software, let me try heating and cooling. It's like, let me understand this problem. It's like, oh, we can build some software for this. Or in many cases, like software plus a little bit of hardware. And I gave you 3 other examples, including companies that aren't ours, so you know I'm not just on a shill pitch session here, but that do this if you're curious, that I think have this combination that are really, really awesome.
I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to shill SPCs. Ryan, you don't have to go back to school, but I'm glad you came to SPC.
You're getting your education here.
Yeah, exactly.
At the premier
You're really
place to do it,
continuing
SBC.
education. Yeah,
Street smarts.
Thank you, Schroepfer.
It's great advice. I've been looking for my keys a bit under the street light because that's the software I have, and I should expand it out a bit. This has been great. Anything else you want to ask before we go to audience questions?
Hi, I'm Sam. So climate plays can take a long time and be really capital intensive. So as you've gotten into investing, how do you manage the risk reward of that? Because it's very different from like the software investing here. It's like you get 400K and like you prove traction and then you get your seed. Like climbing that, like even starting a climate tech company, like how do founders think about it and how do you think about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would start with so I've been in Silicon Valley since the 90s, and it's hilarious because Silicon Valley, it's in our name. It started in hardware. We were chips, and then we were hard drives, and then we moved into software. So and if you look at one of the most valuable companies in the world right now, it's a hardware company. It's NVIDIA, right? So you can build amazingly big hardware businesses, and we've had a history of that. So we'll start there. You are right that building hardware, you often have to get to some minimum scale in order to make it work. And so you have to take a couple of different approaches to this versus software. The first is, and I learned this the hard way at Meta. So when I joined Meta, we were a web company. We didn't do any hardware. Our first crack at this was we started building data centers. First one came online in 2011. 10 years later, we had 10 million square feet under operation in 12 regions around the world. So we built a bunch of buildings and all the stuff in the building. We designed it all from scratch. Kind of had a chip on my shoulder at that point. I was like, I know how to do hardware. Then we went into the consumer hardware business with Oculus and VR headsets and realized that when you ship a box to someone and then they return it because they don't like it, it's like a whole different ball game than building buildings that you own yourself. And so I had to go through a double learning of enterprise hardware and consumer hardware. The biggest takeaway from that is planning is more important. That pivots are really hard, and there are some just fixed time frames when you're building hardware stuff that if I need to do a major design spin, you're probably talking 6 to 8 weeks, and it's really hard to compress. So if I do 3 design spins versus 4, that's an extra 2 months. And so you kind of want to measure twice, cut once on those projects, and just be aware of that up front. And so you do need to plan a little bit better. The other thing, as I was saying to Diddy before we got here, is the other good thing about hardware is it's really easy to model. There's good software, there's good metrics. You can kind of do some basic math, napkin math, on okay, if I get everything right, how good is the system going to perform before I built a single thing? So definitely do that. And then the third thing is just to realize that fundraising is going to be a more important part of your job. And that, yep, you're going to have to raise money, and you're going to have to be smart about when you raise it. Because if you're I have this great idea, give me some money, great, you got some money. And then you show up 6 months later, I still have this great idea, and I have 3 parts on the ground that kind of work, but I can't show you anything. Oof, that's going to be tough. You have to come back and basically be all right, here's the end game we're getting to. I'm going to build this new turbine. It's going to be cheaper than everything else. In order to get there, I have to do 6 things, right? And in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I'm going to come back to you on the following dates and do that. And 6 months later, show up all right, here's number 1. You want to see it? We got it done. We're on to number 2. We're showing you progress. So I need to raise some more money to get there. And you just have this plan where people are man, you're going to get there. Because you just keep knocking out your milestones. And so you have to spend more time on that. It's a little bit more planful all in. And then the last thing is, the other good news in climate is there is a lot of non-dilutive financing. There's a lot of government loans, government grants. There's a lot of ways. We've got a lot of companies. One of our companies got a $150 million grant to help build their factory in West Virginia. That's massive. And they also got a $150 million grant to build a massive battery in Maine. And so, those are non-dilutive. You're not giving up equity to do it. So, and then the last thing I'd say is because you're raising a lot of money, dilution is an issue. And to be honest, it's going to sound self-serving as an investor, but you kind of I think some people try too hard to get precious about it, and really try to jack up valuations, and then you get into a point where I can't raise the money you need, and the company's dead. And that's a dangerous thing. You just kind of need to be yep, we're gonna have these slow bump ups as we hit these milestones, and then when you get there, the good news at the end of all of this is once you get escape velocity as a hardware company, good luck catching it, right? Because if you're out on the market and like, I built this thing, I'm at a 500,000 unit scale, and some new set of entrepreneurs come, we're like, we're going to build that, but we're 2 years behind. I'm like, like not going to work. So look at everyone chasing NVIDIA and how much money they're making, right? We got this like massive lead. They take all the cash, they plow it into the next R&D. So like, it is a really exciting exit if you can get there.
Yeah, those funding notes seem very real, and the planning part seems very real too, and also a little disappointing when we've talked about how iterating is so useful, and really let's just go iterate fast and learn and orient as we go. But for hardware, it's just a necessity.
You've been a builder almost your entire career. Can you elaborate on your experience pivoting into investing?
That's a great question. It's honestly been a little bit of a struggle. If I'm just being honest, if it's like being real about me as a person and a human, is like, it's really fun to build stuff and to have a team and to be like, I went in the office today and I went home and like the following things got done, right? And I can like, or this week or this month, look at this thing I made in this world. It shows up. We're on stage talking about it. You're using my product. That freaking feels great. Like that has fueled me for 20 plus years. And when you're an investor, you're kind of one step removed. You're like, I back this company. They built this big thing. I help them. I help them with a decision. I help them get money. I help them. So you got to kind of, you got to like eat a little bit more humble pie on it. Like have a little bit more humility about your role in the ecosystem. And some investors run around and be like, I did X, Y, and you didn't do that. You helped them. You gave them money. Like you were important, but like let's not overshadow the entrepreneurs. So so I think that like that is an adjustment. It's also from a work style standpoint. I would say two other things. One is like as an operator, you're kind of like in the office every day working on a small number of things. You know, as an investor, like I got to be working on 30 different things at once. That's a little different. And the last thing I'd say, which is actually the hardest, the first couple I kind of knew, and by the time, you know, when I stepped down from my role at Meta in 2022, the teams, it was 35,000 people in my org alone. So we had so many different projects working. I would often at that time describe myself as like a very involved board member in 6 companies, because that was the way I had to sort of treat the leadership team there. So like the first parts of this, I was like, okay, I got this. I can multitask and do other things. The third one has really kind of broken my brain a little bit, which is like as an operator, back to my planning point, like you get rewards for being right. It's like if my success rate is 5%, when I'm like, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I have a 5% success, like I am not going to last long as an operator, right? So you spend a lot of time trying to be 90% correct. For investing, it's the exact inverse. Like your job isn't to correctly pick the, correctly miss out on the opportunities that are going to fail. It's like, is this the 1,000x company that's going to happen or not? And so you've got to identify these unicorns because it's all power law distributions. Is this the company that's going to make it? And so it's a complete inverse of your thinking. And that is the one that I've honestly struggled with the most because I come to I'm like, yeah, that's never going to work. You know, and so I got to really break my brain and be like, okay, why do I believe that? Is that really true? Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we need to make a bet in this space. And so, and like have a lot more humility to like refresh my point of view on things.
Do you think when operators switch to being investors, like, does that last point, do you think it means that product people or business people are better at that switch than engineers?
Having now tried to hire a bunch of other investors to help me, it's a really hard profession to predict performance based on prior work, to be really honest. So I don't believe anyone who makes any statements that like the following experiences or attributes correlate with good investing performance. So it's just a different thing, and it's hard. The funny thing about investing too is like at the end of the day, you're making important decisions on limited information. My best analogy for it is like there is just like taste. Like what you're kind of hiring for is like everyone looked at the same data and you're like, yeah, I think they're going to make it, and so we're going to go for it, right? It's not like if the spreadsheet spits out an answer, I don't need you. Right, if ChatGPT can say like yes, no, then like we don't need humans. At the end of the day, you have humans who are like, I think this team's really good, and I know a lot of people are betting against them, but I'm gonna go for it. And to me, the closest analog is actually product people. If you've ever worked with someone who's a really good product person, they just like have taste, and they're just like they'll bring you a product, and you look at it, you're like, that's fucking great. And like, what did you do? And they won't be able to describe a thing. They're just like, I don't know. I just like thought maybe if we did it this way, it'd be better. And you work with other people, and it's fine. It's like they build perfectly acceptable products that bring me no joy. Like, so like there are these outlier people, you know, in product world. And I think investing, that's what you're looking for. These outlier people be like, I know everyone else thinks this is dumb, but I think this might be it. And like more often than not, they're there. So that's how I've tried to like reorient my brain.
Yep. Yeah, one of the quintessential product people I've worked with like that was Marissa Mayer, coming from Stanford and Google and working with her there. She couldn't always explain why something was a good product decision or bad, but she's like, she always knew and like always had the conviction, and she was pretty much always right. Other questions?
Hi, kind of on that point, I remember but maybe 7 years ago, I saw like glasses on your desk at Facebook and kind of a similar product where you can't really say for sure this is going to work, but it seems like you stuck with it for like 10 years at least. What made you continue working on that even though there wasn't like a direct like signal or proof early that it was going to work?
This is a great question, and I really have to give the credit to Mark Zuckerberg on this. And it's one of the, so I still actually spend a day a week at Meta. I'm still sort of advising them, and part of why I'm there is because I think it is still one of the best places in the world to incubate very risky long-term technology that has massive impact, whether that be AI or AR, VR, or wearables. And my experience in every new product category, including we built an AI research lab in 2013, and I can't tell you how many meetings I was in where people are like, do we really need to have all these AI researchers? Like, is this stuff really gonna matter? And the 10x that on wearables and VR. It's like, yeah, nobody's buying these things. It's like every new technology that I've seen is up until it's obviously awesome to you personally, everyone's like, I don't know. And so in that world, you need to have someone who has belief and vision and does so consistently, because you can't fund it 1 year and then cut the whole team and then fund it. That doesn't work. And so what Mark has done, which is just absolutely effing incredible, is when everyone, the markets, everyone, employees are like, why are you doing this, Mark? He's just like, we're gonna keep going. And then when he's right at the end, everyone's like, oh yeah, it's a genius, and I thought it was good all along, right? But that is a very unique skill. Not a lot of people have the honestly fortitude to stand up to a whole bunch of people being like, this is dumb, you're wasting money. And so that's a skill and a trait I admire in Mark.
So I think we're out of time here. I know that we have a lot more questions. We are at time. So wanted to, sorry, Zyle. Thank you again, Schroepfer.
Yeah,
for coming here. This was super fun.
We talk about any early war stories.
But, we
can do a part 2 at some point.
We would love to. We would love to have you back anytime. But thank you all also for coming and kind of getting a bunch of wisdom drop from Schroepfer. Thank you all. All right, we're a wrap.
Thank you.